There are mysteries that science still can't explain. Colossi erected without technology. Maps drawn before the discovery of continents. Civilizations that disappeared without a trace. All of these are not legends, but real finds recorded by archaeologists, historians, and eyewitnesses, on a journey to uncover 20 mysteries, each of which challenges the accepted picture of the world. These questions have tormented humanity for decades, and all that remains is to try to understand. Perhaps the truth about the past is far more dangerous than it seems. The Secret Labyrinth of Hawara. In the south of Egypt, not far from the little-known pyramid of Amenemhat III, one of the most mysterious structures of antiquity is hidden, an underground labyrinth, the existence of which was confirmed by ancient sources, but which for centuries remained only a shadow among the sands. It was called the Havar Labyrinth. Herodotus, Hellenistic travelers, and 19th century explorers wrote about it. But the strangest thing began when technology finally reached this point in the 21st century, and what it discovered underground was immediately hidden from the public. Herodotus left a description that was long considered an exaggeration or myth. It surpasses the pyramids. There are 12 roofed palaces, 2 levels, one underground, the other above ground. I myself went down to the lower floor, and if I had not seen it with my own eyes, I would not have believed it. Thousands of halls, connected by passages, columns, and all of them carved from the same stone. Later, Strabo and Pliny also mentioned a huge complex where, according to rumors, not only kings but also priests and great scrolls not intended for human consumption were buried. For hundreds of years, archaeologists searched for any confirmation. But the sands of Egypt remained silent. Yet until 2008, that a group of Belgian and Egyptian scientists, with the support of Ghent University and the Mataha Expedition Initiative, did something no one had done before. They used ground-penetrating radar to scan the ground in the Hawara region. This was the last chance to find out whether Herodotus was a fantasist or an eyewitness. The results were shocking. Underground, at a depth of 8 to 12 meters, the radar revealed a massive multi-level structure consisting of halls, galleries, intersections, and chambers extending in different directions. The signal was clear. The shape and size of the object matched Herodotus's description, a gigantic underground complex, the size of a football field. But it is here that the truly mystical mystery begins. Immediately after the publication of the preliminary findings, Egyptian authorities, represented by the Supreme Council of Antiquities, immediately banned any further research and public dissemination of the data. The report was removed from the project's website. The official reason given was national security. No international expedition has since been granted permission to explore the labyrinth. The silence has sparked a wave of speculation. What lies beneath the earth? Why is Egypt, which makes billions from archaeology, blocking the study of a discovery that could become the archaeological sensation of the century? One of the most widespread theories is that the labyrinth contains not just the bodies of pharaohs, but texts that could change our understanding of history. Herodotus wrote that these halls contain all the wisdom of the priests, recorded on stone and papyrus. Could it be that the knowledge of pre-Egyptian civilizations, preserved to this day, resides there? There were other theories, too. Some cited geomagnetic anomalies, as if the complex itself was designed to concentrate energy. Others pointed to similarities in architectural principles with Mayan temples. Some researchers suggested that the labyrinth was built not for humans, but for other forms of consciousness that did not require light or air. It's also curious that many elements of Amenemhat III's pyramid are destroyed, as if someone was attempting to destroy the entrance or divert attention. Modern Egyptian tours of the Hawara region do not include this site. It is fenced off, patrolled, and, despite its archaeological potential, remains effectively closed to researchers. Today, 15 years after the scan, the underground city still exists, but no one can enter it. Some are sure that if the labyrinth is opened, it will be the greatest discovery in human history. Others believe that it was sealed for a reason. What's inside is not what we're supposed to find, because knowledge buried for thousands of years may not just be ancient, it may be dangerous. Official archaeology is silent. The Egyptian authorities maintain an absolute taboo. Documents published in 2008 have disappeared, but ground-penetrating radar doesn't lie. And somewhere beneath the sands, beneath a pyramid carved from stone, lies a structure that ancient historians warned about. Too big, too old, too forgotten. A labyrinth that no one dares enter. White Pyramid of Xi'an. There's a nearly forgotten report in the archives of World War II. In it, a U.S. Air Force pilot, Colonel Maury Sheehan, claims that during a reconnaissance flight over China in March 1945, he saw something impossible. A huge white pyramid standing in the middle of a valley, shining in the sun's rays. According to him, the structure was smooth, almost mirror-like, with a flat top and a height comparable to a skyscraper. As the plane approached, he made out several smaller pyramids nearby, arranged in a geometric pattern. This story might have been dismissed as fantasy if it hadn't been accompanied by a photograph that was later leaked to the press. Although the image itself was long considered lost, in 1994, a researcher, Hartwig Hausdorff, found it in a U.S. military archive. The image does indeed show a pyramidal shape, standing out sharply against the hills. It was dubbed the White Pyramid of China. But since then, a strange silence has set in. Today we know that in Shanxi province, especially near the city of Xi'an, there are indeed dozens of pyramidal mounds that official Chinese archaeology classifies as mausoleums of emperors and nobles of the Han Dynasty. Access to most of them is prohibited. They are covered in grass, often intentionally planted with trees, and there are no roads leading to them. Chinese authorities cite cultural sensitivity and the need for conservation. But those who have attempted to study the area note that this is not a matter of protection, but of isolation. What is known? Some pyramids are truly enormous. For example, the Miaoling Pyramid reaches 46 meters in height. But there are structures mentioned only in satellite images. Their heights can exceed 90 meters, and their geometric symmetry suggests they are not mounds, but artificial engineering structures. What makes the White Pyramid particularly mysterious is its absence from official archaeological documents. Not a single Chinese scientific publication acknowledges its existence. Moreover, since the end of the last century, any foreign expeditions, even those requesting permission to photograph from the air, have been refused. The area within 100 kilometers northwest of Xi'an is considered closed. Some researchers point out that the shape of the White Pyramid is reminiscent not only of Egyptian prototypes, but also of Mesoamerican ziggurats, especially in that it has a truncated top, as if it served as a base for a platform or temple. According to another theory, it could have been an astronomical instrument. If the arrangement of the accompanying pyramids really does follow the stellar pattern, as suggested by supporters of this version, then what we have before us is not a tomb, but a space observation complex dating back to the prehistoric era. But where does such precision come from? And why, if we're talking about a simple mausoleum, has it still not been excavated, studied, or included in tourist routes? One version is more frightening than the others. It is based on indirect evidence from Chinese chronicles of the Tang Dynasty, which mention a certain tomb sealed by heaven. These texts speak of a place that was built according to plans brought from heaven, and where within there are neither bones nor gold, but a heart that cannot be named. These lines have always been considered a metaphor, but if they refer to the White Pyramid, then perhaps it contains not a body, but an object whose origins lie beyond the ordinary. Occasionally, every few years, satellite images record changes on the slopes of the pyramids, the disappearance of vegetation, the appearance of spots with abnormal temperatures. But Chinese sources do not comment on this data. All attempts to conduct independent research end the same way: refusal, silence, and the disappearance of publications. Some speculate that the White Pyramid may be older than China, so ancient that Chinese history itself is merely a chapter written on the ruins of what came before. And perhaps at the top of this pyramid there once stood not a temple, but a signal pointing to the sky. Today, the White Pyramid is a symbol of how much is hidden behind the guise of archival silence. It's not in guidebooks, it's not shown on the news, its photos are deleted from forums, but it's there. It's standing still. Peace Dillery Longyu. In 1992, a simple farmer from the Chinese province of Zhejiang decided to drain a swampy plot of land near his home. He hired workers, installed pumps, and within a few hours, the water was gone. But instead of the usual depression, a dark hole opened up beneath the layer of silt. Carefully descending, the farmer discovered not a crack in the ground, but the entrance to a gigantic underground cave with perfectly carved walls, vaults, and columns. This was the first of the Longyu Caves, China's most inexplicable architectural mystery. 23 more caves were discovered in the same area. All were man-made. All were colossal in size. Some reached 30 meters in height. Their walls were polished to a smooth finish. Inside were rows of columns, ceilings, terraces, stairs, ledges and passages extending in various directions. They are all located at different depths, but none intersect with another. The structure is so precise that it seems as if someone designed them in advance, using large-scale engineering drawings. But what makes these caves truly mystical is that there is not a single line about their existence in historical chronicles. Not a single official chronicle, not a single ancient Han Dynasty text, not a single folk myth mentions the construction of these caves. For Chinese tradition, with its meticulous approach to recording history, this is practically impossible. Such structures could not have arisen by chance or in isolation. Calculations show that to carve even one cave by hand would require at least 1,000 people working 12 hours a day for 6 years. And this is just one cave out of 24. There are tool marks inside, but they are all identical. Parallel lines run along the walls, as if left by some kind of machine tool. They cover absolutely every surface, the walls, the columns, and the ceilings. No modern tool could recreate such a pattern by hand on such a scale. Moreover, some halls exhibit an acoustic effect whereby sound propagates as in concert halls, strictly along the center, with resonance. In other words, the caves possess an acoustic symmetry unattainable by ancient technologies. But even if we assume these are religious sites, there are no inscriptions, images, or artifacts inside. Not a single object indicating who lived, prayed, or worked there. The entire space is carved out to the point of emptiness, as if they were created not for life, but for the very fact of existence. Some researchers suggest these were grandiose reservoirs, but stairs, columns, and terraces are not built in such cases. Others speak of secret ancient military installations, but archaeology confirms no trace of combat use. Still others see astronomical chambers in the caves, indicating underground timekeeping by sound or shadow. But then why were they sealed? Why didn't they continue? Another hypothesis involves artificial stimulation of consciousness through acoustics. In some halls, people reported a sensation of vibration in the chest when pronouncing certain frequencies. An experiment was even conducted with Tibetan monks inside one of the caves, and they declared the place induces silence in the mind. However, Chinese authorities refused further access to internal research, citing the specific sensitivity of the object. It's especially worth noting that all the caves were filled with water and were discovered only by chance. Who flooded them and why is unknown. Were they abandoned? Or, on the contrary, protected from the outside world? There's a theory that Longyu is the remnants of a prehistoric civilization that existed before the Chinese era began. Perhaps this is why the chronicles are silent. They simply weren't around when all this was created. Another theory is that it involved contact. The caves were allegedly carved not for humans, but for another type of creature, perhaps tall or inhumanly sensitive to sound. The columns and geometry suggest that this may be a space where frequency, rather than function, is important. Today, the Longyu Caves are closed to tourists. Several chambers have been filled in. Locals are reluctant to talk about the history of the discovery, and even the coordinates of some cavities have been removed from Google Maps. Official science has given only one explanation. We don't know. And until they are rediscovered, they will wait like a silent memory block in the body of the planet. Without explanation, without a name, without time. The lost city of Tlangsalacan. In 2016, a team of archaeologists using cutting-edge LiDAR technology to scan the Mexican jungle accidentally discovered a strange terrain feature in the Tabasco region. In a place considered uninhabitable, flat and uninhabitable for decades, the dense canopy of foliage suddenly revealed the outlines of streets, rectangles, staircases, and, most strikingly, a gigantic stone arch, over 20 meters high. Thus, a forgotten city was discovered, not mentioned in any source of the Mayan, Toltec, or Aztec civilizations. It didn't appear in legends, chronicles, or traditions. The locals didn't even name it. The explorers themselves gave it the name Tlangsalacan, which can be translated as the place where the voice disappeared. From the very first steps of archaeologists, details began to emerge that didn't fit into the conventional model of pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. First, the city's layout didn't correspond to any known scheme, neither radial, like Teotihuacan, nor stepped, like the Maya. The central part of Tlangsalacan was a double ellipse, surrounded by a spiral-shaped stone wall. But the strangest thing was that in the center was neither a temple nor a pyramid, but a completely smooth platform about 60 meters in diameter, made of obsidian. Those who approached were met with something inexplicable. It was impossible to speak on this platform. Voices became quiet, as if extinguished. Whispers became silent. Sound recording devices detected a faint vibration at a frequency of about 12 hertz, barely perceptible to the ear but clearly affecting the vocal cords. The phenomenon was unexplained, but everyone who stepped onto the black circle felt the silence not as an absence of sound, but as a pressure, as if sound were being forced out of the space. One of the acousticians who examined the site called it an inversion chamber without walls, essentially a space where resonance is physically suppressed. Others went further, suggesting that the site was used not for human voices, but for a different type of vibration, perhaps connected with rituals in which sound was controlled differently, not by speaking words, but by creating waves. But who built this city? Clearing the area revealed the presence of more than 170 buildings, including several residential complexes, a drainage system, hieroglyphic columns, with inscriptions not related to any known culture of the region. Even the architecture pointed to a different origin. Inserts of glassy material were found in stone blocks, probably formed at temperatures over 1500 degrees, which is not typical for local construction technologies. Another oddity, the city is completely devoid of burials. Not a single burial, no ritual chambers, no sacrifices, nothing. Given the scale of the settlement, the absence of the dead is an anomaly. A hypothesis has arisen that the inhabitants abandoned it voluntarily, perhaps suddenly, leaving everything as it was. Stone vessels, blankets, household utensils. It's as if the people disappeared overnight. The most disturbing discovery was made in 2017. On one of the columns, researchers discovered a relief depicting a human figure without a mouth. Instead of a mouth, there's a concave indentation. Above it is a spiral, extending upward like a symbol of sound emanating from the sky. Nearby are 8 repeating symbols, resembling waves or chords. This symbol has no analogs found in Mesoamerica or elsewhere. The research was planned to continue, but a year later the project was shelved. The official reason given was instability in the region. However, some expedition members later anonymously reported repeated GPS anomalies, electronic problems, and in one case, the disappearance of a team member for 27 hours over the city. He was found 5 kilometers from the camp with memory lapses and profound fear. He was unable to explain where he had gone. Access to Tlangsalacan has been closed since then. The Obsidian site has been covered with geotextile and filled with gravel. Chinese and Mexican satellites have not published any recent images of the area. The only remaining images are LiDAR scans and copies of photographs posted online before the research team's servers were shut down. A city unknown to the peoples who lived around it. A place where the voice fades and the dead do not remain. A city that disappeared from memory, not because it was forgotten, but because no one had the right to remember it. Underground City. In 1963, a resident of a Turkish village in the Cappadocia region decided to renovate his basement. He began demolishing a wall, expecting to find voids or exposed stone, when he suddenly stumbled upon a tunnel leading off into the darkness. Curiosity got the better of him. He went deeper and discovered a staircase, then a spacious hall, and then another. Thus, the entrance to one of the most mysterious and inexplicable sites of antiquity, the underground city of Derinkuyu, was accidentally discovered. Today, it is known that Derinkuyu extends to a depth of over 60 meters and comprises at least 18 floors, some of which remain unexplored. This is not just a hollowed-out cave, it is an entire underground megastructure designed to accommodate tens of thousands of people. There are living quarters, storerooms, wells, ventilation shafts, schools, wine storage facilities, livestock areas, and even temples. All of this is carved from a monolith of tuff, without concrete reinforcement, without modern technology, but with an engineering precision that casts doubt on the official dating. Its construction is attributed to the 8th century BCE, but there are no reliable historical sources about its construction at all. Moreover, the city is not mentioned in Turkish chronicles or annals until the 20th century. It is as if it simply did not exist in human memory. The ventilation system in Derinkuyu is one of the main mysteries. A vertical shaft runs through the center of the city, from which more than 50 ventilation ducts extend, penetrating all levels. Even on the lowest floors, the air is fresh and dry. The design of this system still raises questions, not only its effectiveness, but also the method of its design and construction in the absence of maps, instruments, and artificial lighting. Each level of the city could be sealed off with stone doors, giant circular discs that sealed passages from the inside. These stone barriers weigh up to 500 kilograms, and when open, they are invisible. Only special grooves indicate where they are hidden. This suggests that the city was not simply a refuge, but a place originally conceived as a system of protection, control, and complete isolation. But protection from whom? According to one theory, the inhabitants were hiding from nomads or invaders. But then the city would have been habitable for a short period of time, not equipped for long-term life support. There are even church buildings inside, suggesting a long-term stay rather than an emergency shelter. More radical researchers suggest that Derinkuyu is an infrastructure created after a global catastrophe. According to some indirect evidence, the structures of Cappadocia may have arisen immediately after the last ice age, an era when climatic and atmospheric conditions on the surface could have been deadly. Derinkuyu would then become not a fortress, but an underground artifact of survival. The lack of burials raises even more questions. Not a single burial has been found throughout the entire system. Did people live there, eat, build, worship, but not die? Or were the bodies removed, This is strange for any culture, especially when we're talking about thousands of people. Another disturbing fact is the silence. For decades, locals didn't report the cave's existence. It was believed they belonged to jinns and were dangerous to enter. After their official discovery in the 1960s, Turkish authorities carried out a partial restoration, but then closed more than 60% of the levels to public access without explaining the reason. Some sources claim that on the lower floors, the expedition's instruments began to fail, orientation was disrupted, and some participants experienced hallucinations and panic attacks. It was also discovered that Derinkuyu is connected by underground tunnels to other cities 10 kilometers or more away. This suggests a system, possibly trans-regional. If there was a system, then there was a centralized authority, a project, and a resource base. But who controlled it remains unknown. Today, tourists are only allowed to walk along the first 8 floors. Below, there's silence, light is kept out, photography is prohibited, and guides avoid discussing what lies at the bottom. Sound in the caves of Malta. On Malta, a tiny island in the Mediterranean Sea, there's a place where science has stumbled upon something that still defies explanation. This place isn't visible from the outside, it's hidden underground, and it's older than the pyramids of Egypt. It's called the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum. It is officially recognized as an ancient temple included in the UNESCO World Heritage List, and according to archaeologists, was built no later than the 4th millennium BC. But it is not the date that makes it unique. The real secret is the sound. Hal Saflieni is a 3-level underground complex carved out of limestone. Inside are halls, niches, corridors, and ritual chambers. But one of these chambers, located on the 2nd level, has a strange name, the Oracle Room. It's small, about 2 by 3 meters. Inside, the walls are perfectly smooth, hand-carved, and the ceiling is domed. But the main thing is the acoustics. If a person speaks at a frequency of 110 Hz, the voice begins to resonate, amplify, and fills the entire room with a dense, almost physically perceptible vibrational background. Experiments have shown that at this frequency, sound propagates throughout the complex, passing through walls, vaults, and adjacent rooms. Moreover, a male voice resonates more strongly than a female voice, especially in the range of 95 to 120 Hz. This leads to one of the most disturbing hypotheses. Perhaps the ancients knew how to tune consciousness through sound. Modern acousticians claim that being in the Oracle Room during prolonged sound exposure is like being inside a musical instrument. Some volunteers have reported a loss of time perception, a change in pulse rate, a feeling of external pressure, and spontaneous visual images arising from repeated low-frequency mantras. Psychophysiologists point out that 110 Hz is a frequency close to the vibrations of the brain's limbic system, which is responsible for fear, memory, and emotion. The question arises, is this a coincidence? Or is it deliberate design? Archaeologists are perplexed. How could Stone Age people have designed a space where sound isn't reflected chaotically, but is focused, directed, and influences perception? After all, they had no understanding of acoustics, didn't use instruments, and left no drawings. Yet the effect achieved in the hypogeum surpasses many modern concert halls. Even more ominous is the hypothesis put forward in 2008, which suggests that the acoustic effect was not a side effect, but the primary function of the room. Some researchers believe the hypogeum was used not simply for rituals, but to induce trance states. Perhaps priests or initiates intentionally inducing altered states of consciousness through voice, rhythm, and vibration. This may explain the images found near the camera, which do not resemble any known symbol of the era: spirals, waves, curved lines radiating from one point. The most horrific discovery was made in the 20th century, but until now it has been known only from oral histories. During excavations from 1902 to 1911, Archaeologist Temple Fleury allegedly discovered more than 7,000 bones belonging to children and adolescents. The bones were stacked in the lower level of the complex, where sound is virtually impermeable. But there were no signs of violent death. Who were these children? Why were they there? Later, at the end of the last century, access to the lower levels of the hypogeum was closed. Tourists can visit only a small part of the complex and only with a guide. Photography is prohibited. Research is limited. The Oracle Room is not used for acoustic testing on living humans, ostensibly for ethical reasons. However, reports from the Malta National Science Council indicate that exposure to a frequency of 110 Hz for more than 10 minutes may cause unpredictable effects. One of the most disturbing theories belongs to the Italian researcher Paolo Graziano. He argues that the hypogeum may contain infrasound vibrations perceived by the body, but not by the ear. In this case, architecture was built not for hearing, but for perception at the level of cells, the nervous system, and perhaps even consciousness itself. Why? To connect with something? To hear? Or, on the contrary, to muffle something that shouldn't be allowed out? Copper scroll from Qumran. In the spring of 1952, among the remains of the ancient settlement of Qumran in the Judean desert, archaeologists discovered a find that didn't fit any familiar patterns. It was a scroll, but not made of papyrus or leather, like all the others in the Dead Sea Scrolls collection. It was made of copper. And what was written on it immediately baffled researchers because, unlike the other texts, sacred, philosophical, theological, the copper scroll was a treasure list. The text was engraved, not written in ink. Its language differed from religious rhetoric. The style was dry, inventory-like. It was a description of 64 hiding places where enormous quantities of gold, silver, vessels, and ritual objects were allegedly hidden. Some lines indicated specific geographic landmarks, the burial depth, and even the method of entry. For example, in the Matiahu pool, under the northern wall, at a depth of 2 cubits, a silver vessel. Weight, 17 talents. That's more than 500 kilograms. Researchers initially thought it might be fiction, a legend, or esotericism. But they soon realized the scroll was written by someone with direct access to the treasures. Who was he? And most importantly, where did such volumes of gold come from, a quantity unmatched by any known state of that era? The strangest thing is, no other scrolls, and more than 900 were found, contained even a mention of treasure. Only this one, and only in copper, as if it were made to survive everything, and be read, in due time. Attempts to find the aforementioned caches began immediately, and they continued for decades. They searched in the Qumran area, in the caves of the Judean desert, in the dungeons beneath Jerusalem, but all they could find were empty cavities, overgrown shafts, and very neat backfill, as if someone had been there before. A suspicion arose. The treasures had long since been removed. But by whom? One hypothesis is that these are lost relics of the Second Temple, hidden before the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 CE. Perhaps the temple nobility, realizing the temple would fall, decided to conceal the most important things. Not just wealth, but symbols of power. Lamps, altar vessels, even fragments of the Ark of the Covenant itself. This hypothesis is supported by the fact that none of these relics were ever found after the temple's destruction. Another theory is even more disturbing. Some researchers believe the Copper Scroll may not be a list of hidden items, but a list of activated ones, that we're talking about more than just hiding places, but energy points where each vessel not only carries weight but also significance for a ritual, a system, a certain memory architecture. Proponents of this theory point to the repeating structure of phrases and patterns in the geography of objects. Some storerooms are arranged in a spiral, while others align with a center that is never specified. It's as if the coordinates refer to a diagram rather than to locations. But the most disturbing fragment of text, which eluded translation for a long time, was one. It appears outside the list as if beneath the line. And the third door will be closed, and the knowledge will be hidden. Only recently have philologists concluded that it is a fragment of a formula, most likely a ritual incantation or a phrase from an apocryphal tradition. But why is it engraved in a treasure list? In 2009, a French expedition exploring one of the areas mentioned in the scroll discovered a stone vault filled with particular care. Inside, it was empty, but along the edges of the vault were depressions with signs of high-temperature heating. The temperature required for such traces is over 1,000 degrees Celsius. What burned inside is unknown, but there was no gold. Today, the original copper scroll is kept in the Jordan Archaeological Museum. Access is restricted. Only a copy is permitted for study. The reasons are the preservation and uniqueness of the material. New research is on hold. The official position is that the scroll has no proven practical value, but unofficially, many acknowledge that even if part of the treasure did exist, the scale of this silence could change our understanding of religion, history, and who hid what in the sands of Judea. The giant monolith of Baiti, on the edge of the Syrian desert amid sand and ruins, lies a boulder that, by all accounts, shouldn't exist. It hasn't been eroded by time. It hasn't been moved. It hasn't been lifted. It remains in the quarry, a gigantic stone, carved from the rock but unmoved. This boulder weighs approximately 1,200 tons. That's more than any known monolith in the world. It's called simply the Baiti monolith, and it's one of the most disturbing archaeological paradoxes in the Middle East. Baiti is located in the area of the ancient city of Baalbek, famous as the site where the Romans built the Temple of Jupiter. But upon closer inspection, it turns out that the temple's foundation is made of blocks that are alarming in their own right. 3 of them, the trilithons, weigh about 800 tons each, and they are stacked on top of each other with millimeter precision. But beneath them, in the same quarry, lies an even larger stone, left there forever. Question: if the Romans were able to deliver 800-ton blocks, why did they leave this one? The Baiti monolith measures over 20 meters long, 4.5 meters high, and almost 5 meters wide. It is perfectly rectangular. The cut lines are clear, smooth, and crack-free. It is neither broken nor damaged. In other words, it was completely ready for transport, but for some reason remained in the ground. Science offers a rational explanation. Perhaps the stone was too heavy, and the builders abandoned it. But this explanation raises more questions than it answers. First, why cut such a block if smaller ones had already been used? Second, how did they even plan to move it? In ancient times, there were no cranes, platforms, or lifts capable of moving such a load. Even modern mechanisms would be unable to lift 1,200 tons without specialized training and equipment. Furthermore, no traces of lifting structures, rollers, beams, or lever systems have been found near the monolith. Some researchers, including engineer and historian Jean-Pierre Adam, claim that earthen embankments, rails, and grease could have been used to move the blocks at Baalbek. However, no remains of these structures have been found nearby. Most importantly, no one can explain how the precision of the installation of such enormous blocks was achieved. The joints between them are less than a millimeter, and the surface is so smooth that not even a needle can fit between the slabs. A hypothesis arises that the blocks were not simply laid, but formed part of an unknown technological system, possibly of prehistoric origin. Some theories posit that Baalbek existed long before Rome, and that the Romans merely used the existing foundations without understanding their true purpose. In ancient Phoenician texts, Baalbek is mentioned as the place of the descent of the gods and is called the City of the Sun Gate. Moreover, myths say that a house was built here for Baal, the ruler of the sky. Is it possible that the monoliths were part of an energetic or ritual complex intended not for humans, but for another power? The Beatty monolith itself has never moved. It remains in the quarry, a frozen testament to the impossible. All that is known about it is its mass, its shape, and the fact that no one on Earth has been able to replicate it. Another oddity: plants growing near the stone are not typical for the region's climate. Instruments also detect a weak magnetic field anomaly in the area, as if the stone contains a component that influences electromagnetic processes. This raises cautious speculation that the block may have been processed or worked using technologies unknown to us. Today, access to the monolith is free, but it is surrounded by silence. Guides do not linger near it. Scientists avoid publications. It is not used in tourist brochures. Perhaps because it's not just a discarded block. It's a question that haunts those who know what the impossible looks like in the light of the midday sun. It's still there, as if waiting to be picked up. And maybe on that day, we'll finally understand who put it there. Pyramids under the ice of Antarctica. Antarctica, a continent covered in kilometers of ice, where not a single tree can survive, and temperatures can kill a person in half an hour. It is the last blank spot on the map of the Earth. And it is here, amid the cold, winds, and silent mountains, that one of the most ominous and poorly explained archaeological mysteries of our time begins. In 2012, satellite images published by independent researchers revealed something unexpected: 3 distinct peak formations rising above the icy wasteland. They were located in the southern Wilkes Land region, in a hard-to-reach area. But most importantly, they were symmetrical, and one of them had a tetrahedral shape, reminiscent of a classical Egyptian pyramid. The distances between the objects also formed a geometric figure, almost identical to the arrangement of the 3 pyramids of Giza. Scientists attempted to explain the phenomenon as the erosion of mountain peaks sculpted by wind and ice. However, geologists working with similar structures pointed out that no known natural process produces such symmetrical faces with even angles and aligned orientations. Furthermore, radar images detected voids within the central pyramid, resembling internal chambers. The photographs were published on forums and in open satellite databases, raising a wave of questions. But then a series of oddities began. First, the images began disappearing. In Google Earth, NASA Worldview, and other archival maps, certain fragments of the images began to blur, be replaced with low-quality versions, or be deleted. These were attributed to rendering errors. However, users who managed to save the original files presented the originals, with distinct pyramids, shadows, and coordinates. It was later revealed that in 2001, the U.S. and Norwegian militaries conducted a classified operation in the same region, under the guise of researching anomalous terrain. There is still no information on the mission's results. Moreover, some archives list the project's codename as Project Iceworm 2, although officially this name was associated with a different region, Greenland. Even more intriguing was the report of Chilean researcher Juan Delgado, who claimed that in 1958, Argentine Air Force pilots observed a black metallic structure partially protruding from beneath the ice. The report was classified, but a brief description of it surfaced in the memoirs of one of the officers. At the time, it was assumed to be a meteorite. Today, no longer. There are many hypotheses. One is that Antarctica wasn't always covered in ice. Geological evidence confirms that before the glaciation, this continent was part of a landmass connected to South America and Australia. The last green period could have ended only 15,000 years ago. This means that a civilization that lived before the catastrophe could have existed here and perhaps created architectural forms we don't know about. Some believe the pyramids may have been energy beacons connected to a global system similar to Giza, Teotihuacan, and Baalbek. This is especially true given that magnetic field anomalies and unexplained signals, short radio pulses emanating from beneath the ice, have also been recorded in the Wilkes Land region. Others go further, hypothesizing the extraterrestrial origin of the objects. This theory gained momentum after a former NASA employee leaked data in 2016, citing, "The structure in Antarctica is clearly not natural and unmanned platforms have already been sent to it." This information is unconfirmed, but it raises questions. If these are simply ice mountains, why so much military secrecy? The scientific community remains silent. There are no official studies of the objects. Scientists' requests for expeditions are denied. There are no results from ice scans. And since 2019, Google has completely erased the 3D image of these coordinates from its map. Today, only surviving photographs, archived by enthusiasts, and elevation maps remain, clearly showing the contours. But what lies beneath the ice, no one knows, or at least no one is saying. Antarctica isn't just cold, it's silence, humanity's blind spot, and maybe that's where something is waiting to emerge when the ice finally melts. Library under the temple in Teotihuacan. In 2003, Mexican archaeologists working at the Teotihuacan complex, one of the most enigmatic cities of ancient America, discovered a strange hole in the ground at the foot of the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent. It wasn't just a void. Radar detected a carefully constructed underground tunnel extending deep beneath the temple. Clearing it took years. It wasn't until 2009 that Sergio Gomez's team began its descent. What they found beneath the pyramids changed our very understanding of pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. The tunnel led more than 100 meters deep. Its walls were covered in traces of mercury, metallic, pure, in drops and puddles. Such things had never been found in ancient structures before. Instruments recorded abnormal electrical conductivity signals and unusual humidity, despite the dry rock. But most importantly, the tunnel was man-made, with precise orientation and thoughtful architecture. At its end, a system of chambers began, some of which were perfectly round, as if carved with a drill. But the Toltecs, Teotihuacans, or Mayans never had drills. Inside the chambers, the researchers found strange spheres, hundreds of apple-sized objects made of clay, but covered in a shiny layer resembling mica, or a mica-like mineral. Their purpose is unknown. There were no inscriptions, images, or ritual signs, only the spheres arranged in a strict order, as if someone had arranged them, or they had grown there. The archaeologists themselves have officially acknowledged that this may be a burial site, but not a single body has been found. No skeletons, no ashes, no urns, only symbols, objects, and an inexplicable sense of intentionality. 2 side chambers were also discovered, located asymmetrically to the main tunnel. Their walls were covered in a crystalline dust that reflected light. When laser scanning was performed inside, the beams scattered across the space, as if there was an optical distortion. This is not a hologram, not a mirror. Perhaps it is a natural property of the material. But some physicists admitted to the analysis pointed out that the behavior of light in these halls is reminiscent of photon traps used in modern quantum experiments. Rumors of a library under the temple began after one expedition found a small fragment of an unknown alloy covered in microscopic notches. It was similar in shape to a cylinder seal, but too small, about 4 cm, and too thin to be a runic artifact. Under magnification, repeating geometric patterns became visible, something between digital code and fractal ornamentation. The reports list this object as an unidentified engraving on a metal substrate. It was seized for analysis and has not been publicly reported since. The researchers claimed it was sent for study, but did not specify where. Since then, the hypothesis of an underground library has grown stronger, especially considering that the very architecture of Teotihuacan, a city built without writing, yet with stunning symmetry and scale, hints at knowledge conveyed beyond words. Perhaps we are witnessing an attempt to preserve information in forms we cannot yet read. Vibration, minerals, light, the arrangement of objects. It is here, beneath the temple that mercury becomes the key. In ancient cultures, it was considered a conduit between worlds, a substance between life and death, spirit and body. In China, India, and Persia, mercury was used in alchemy. Why did it end up beneath a temple in Mexico, thousands of kilometers and centuries removed from other civilizations? Some believe Teotihuacan is not a city, but a repository, a hub of ancient knowledge encoded in its architecture. It's no coincidence that the pyramids are built in precise alignment with the stars, and the Avenue of the Dead is oriented strictly along the magnetic field. After 2015, excavations suddenly stopped. The official version stated that the threat of collapse requires reinforcement, but work has been suspended. Tourists are prohibited from entering the tunnel. Not a single film crew has received permission to enter. And in 2021, Mexican authorities announced that further research will be conducted in a closed scientific format about 10 artifacts from Crete. Crete is the island where one of the first European civilizations, the Minoan culture, emerged. Its palaces, frescoes, writing, and mythology still evoke awe and wonder. But one discovery, made in the 20th century in the ruins of a palace in Malaya, called into question the entire known picture of Bronze Age trade. It was a simple bowl, but it was made not of copper, not of gold, not of ceramic, but of pure tin. And this is precisely what became the problem. Tin is a key component of bronze, the alloy that defined an entire era. Without it, it would have been impossible to cast weapons, tools, and statues. But there's a catch. There are no tin deposits on Crete. Neither is there any in neighboring mainland Greece or even in Asia Minor. The closest possible sources are the British Isles, especially Cornwall, Eastern Europe, or Central Asia. How did dozens of objects made of pure tin, processed and cast to high quality, end up in Crete 1,000 years before our era? At first, archaeologists assumed the island traded with distant regions. However, no Cretan ships were found in those areas. Furthermore, metal analysis of the artifacts revealed traces of isotopes characteristic of deposits located in Wales. This means that the metal was not simply delivered to Crete, but they already knew where to transport it from, how to extract it, smelt it, and use it, thousands of kilometers away. The question arises, was there a transcontinental trade network in the Bronze Age that connected Britain, the Aegean, and the Middle East 1,500 years before the Phoenicians and Greeks? Or was there someone who managed these connections from the shadows, a civilization of which only fragments remain? In 2018, an international team of geochemists conducted isotopic analysis of several objects from Cretan Minoan burials. Their conclusion, the tin composition does not match any known Bronze Age supply route. Moreover, several samples were found to contain traces of tungsten and lead-ester, which require temperatures higher than those attainable by smelting furnaces of the time. In other words, tin wasn't just imported, it was processed using technologies that shouldn't have existed. This could mean one of three things. The Minoans possessed knowledge that was lost after their disappearance. Tin was supplied through a network far larger and more sophisticated than we previously assumed. We are dealing with the remnants of contact with a civilization whose knowledge exceeded the capabilities of its time. Any of these possibilities undermines the established picture of history. A particular theory has begun to emerge among researchers. Perhaps Crete was a transit point, not an end consumer, but a center for the processing and distribution of rare metals. In this light, the island's palaces and temples become not simply cultural centers, but the infrastructure of an ancient technological process, in which metal played no less a role than religion or power. This is also indicated by the strange feature of some objects, the absence of signs of wear. They were not used in everyday life. They were not funerary gifts. They simply lay there as samples or as technical standards. These vessels can be seen in museums in Chania, Heraklion, and Athens. But there are no explanations, only laconic captions. Tin bowl. Alloy of unknown origin. Ritual object. These finds are mentioned in passing in publications. And in the reports of some expeditions, they are crossed out, as if something about them was not meant to be understood. The disappearance of the Sioux people. Deep in the desert canyons of Arizona, where stones retain the warmth of millennia, archaeologists have discovered the strange remains of a once thriving settlement. Stone platforms, round temples, stairs and carvings carved into the rocks. Everything pointed to the presence of an organized society capable of building, planning, and worship. Local tribes called this place the Land of the Silent Ones. But the most astonishing thing is that not a single culture in the area claims it as their ancestor. The people who lived here left no bones, no legends, no descendants. Only a name passed down through the elders. Shuk. This word is found nowhere else, not in the documents of Spanish missionaries, not in the archives of ethnographers, not in the language of modern tribes. The Siuka are a people who disappeared not as a result of war, epidemic, or assimilation, but as if erased from history, vanished literally in a few generations, leaving only traces of architecture and anomalies. Archaeologists exploring the region were puzzled. The structures were well planned, carved at precise angles, and arranged in accordance with the cycles of the sun and moon. At the center of each settlement was a stone circle surrounded by 7 symmetrical protrusions resembling seats. Some of them bore burnt handprints, but no signs of pain or struggle. The firing temperature was over 900 degrees Celsius, and not a single skeleton was found nearby. Inside the circles are remnants of quartz dust, ash, and sand, which is not found in the region. Its composition matched samples from southern Nevada. But how did it end up hundreds of kilometers away, especially in a sacred area? Some researchers, including Dr. Emily Pearson, have suggested that the circles were not altars, but rather devices for acoustic or energetic influence. When sounds in a certain tone were pronounced, vibrations were observed in the air and a response from the walls. Moreover, the sound seemed to curl in on itself, disappearing into the center. In one case, during an experiment, a precipitous drop in temperature was recorded within the circle, although outside the heat reached 35 degrees Celsius. Rock carvings found in the gorges depicted faceless people with elongated skulls and arms reaching toward the stars. Some figures are clearly depicted upside down. One of the grottos contains 28 figures connected by thin lines forming a spiral. This is the only fragment where the lines were not painted, but melted into the stone. How? With what? It is unknown. There is a suggestion that the Sioux were not an indigenous people in the usual sense, but were an alien group that migrated to the American Southwest from Central or South America long before the rise of the Mayans and Aztecs. Their architecture is truly distinctive. They built not on top of the rocks, but cut into them, as if avoiding open spaces. Their dwellings were sunken into the ground, with narrow passages reminiscent of systems from Peru or Bolivia. But if they came, where did they go? In 1984, an expedition exploring one of the caves stumbled upon a collapsed passage. After clearing it, a narrow shaft opened up, leading down more than 50 meters. Below was an empty chamber with a flat floor made of polished basalt slabs. In the center is a stone with a cutout hole, a perfect circle, about 80 centimeters deep. At the bottom of the hole is a crystal. Its composition has not been determined. A sample was removed for study, but has not since been included in any scientific reports. 3 days after its opening, the mine was officially closed. The region was declared archaeologically unstable. All work ceased. Since then, the story of the Sioux people remains unanswered. Local tribesmen interviewed by journalists merely shrug. We don't know who they were, But they weren't like us, and when they left, they didn't even leave a shadow. Engraving on a rock in Brazil. In the heart of the Amazon, near the city of Manacuapiru in northern Brazil, stands a solitary stone monolith that doesn't appear in any guidebook. Hidden among tropical vegetation near the banks of the Negro River, locals call it simply Itaguatiara, which means carved stone in the Tupi language. It's enormous, over 10 meters long and almost 4 meters high. But the important thing isn't its size. What's important is what covers its surface, symbols carved into the rock that have no parallel in any American culture. These engravings are not drawings. They are geometric symbols up to 2 centimeters deep, executed with astonishing precision. Some of them are parallel spirals, others are closed figure eights, concentric circles, and crisscross grids resembling wave grids. In certain light, it appears as if it were a visualization of a sound or shape captured in motion. No known pre-Hispanic culture in Brazil used such forms. Itaguatiara is a mystery not only because of its shape, but also because of its origin. The first archaeologists studied it in the 19th century and mistakenly believed it to be a colonial-era creation. But modern dating methods of the surface and erosion layers have shown that the drawings are at least 7,000 years old. This makes them among the oldest evidence of a sign system in South America, and perhaps in the world. The question arises, who and why left a message that no one can decipher to this day? Some researchers have hypothesized that this is an archaic form of writing, predating all known South American systems. But then why has it not continued? Where are the other examples? Where are the speakers? Where is the evolution of the language? Everything has disappeared, as if Itaguatiara were the only place where knowledge came, and then vanished. Another version is astronomical. Many of the symbols are oriented strictly according to the cardinal directions, and one of the spirals points to a point that coincides with the position of Sirius in the sky around 5000 BC. Perhaps the monolith was used as a platform for observing the stars, where the engravings served as a counting system or calendar. But there's a third theory, more disturbing. According to ethnographer João Mendes, who spent years among the Beret tribe, elders spoke of a place where the stone sings. This description specifically applied to Itaguatiara. They claim that if you stand in a certain spot near the monolith and utter a sound of a certain pitch, the rock will begin to resonate. One of the experimenters attempted to replicate this and indeed recorded a vibration in his body, despite the absence of external sound. This effect was later confirmed by geophysicists. It turned out that the stone has a special quartzite structure capable of transmitting vibrations, and some of the engravings match the shapes that arise in the sand when exposed to sound, the so-called Chladnian figures. This suggested that Itaguatiara is not just an inscription, but a recorded sound. Not text, but a voice transformed into form. And if so, then who uttered it? Some believe the monolith is an echo of a visit from an unknown culture, perhaps from outside familiar geography, and even from outside human history. An engraving that cannot be deciphered because it is not a code $, but a transmission of a different nature of perception. Today, Itaguatiara is almost forgotten. There is no road leading to it. Only rare enthusiasts make their way through the jungle to see this stone and hear its silence. Ukok Plateau. High in the Altai Mountains, on the border of Russia, Mongolia, China, and Kazakhstan, lies one of the most remote and inaccessible places in Siberia. The Ukok Plateau. This harsh, cold, and desolate expanse, pierced by winds and framed by icy ridges, is covered in snow almost all year round, and only in summer is the frozen ground briefly exposed. Here, in the permafrost, archaeologists in 1993 made a discovery that caused an international stir: a woman's tomb, perfectly preserved for 2,500 years. Thus began a story that remains an open question in archaeology, medicine, ethnology, and in attitudes toward taboos. She was nicknamed the Princess of Ukok. She was buried in a wooden sarcophagus carved from larch, along with 6 sacrificial horses, richly decorated and wearing ritual masks. Nearby were vessels with plants, mirrors, jewelry, and everyday objects. But most importantly, the body. It was so well preserved in the permafrost that not only the hair and skin were preserved, but also the tattoos, executed with an amazing technique. Figures of fantastic animals, intertwined with symbols, many of which have not yet been interpreted. Anthropologists noted that the princess's facial features didn't match those of any modern people in the region. She had fine cranial lines, an elongated face, and distinctly Caucasian features. Some researchers have suggested that she may have been a member of the Scythian elite or the Paziric culture, but this identity has never been definitively established. The tomb's contents raised even more questions. Not only meat and kumis were found, but also remains of cannabis and plants with a strong psychoactive effect. This led to the hypothesis that the woman was not simply a noblewoman, but a priestess or shaman, conducting rituals of passage or communication with the world of the dead. What happened next has caused the most controversy. The body was taken to Novosibirsk for examination, and almost immediately afterward, a series of earthquakes, floods, and other natural anomalies, including devastating mudflows and landslides, began in the region. Local residents, especially the Altai people, were outraged. For them, Ukok was and remains a sacred territory, and the burial sites are inviolable. The removal of the body was perceived as an act of desecration. There were accusations that the archaeologists had violated an ancient vow and that the spirits had been disturbed. The situation escalated into a cultural conflict. The authorities attempted to resolve the issue. Some artifacts were returned, but the body of the princess remains stored at the Siberian Institute of Archaeology. Demands for its return to the plateau continue to this day. Further tension was generated by the results of biological tests. According to an internal report from 1995, the woman had signs of a tumor, possibly malignant, as well as spinal pathology. However, her body was laid to rest with the utmost honors, and the burial exceeded any known ones in scale. This gave rise to the hypothesis that the woman may have held a special status, either social or sacred. Perhaps she was perceived as a prophetess, a mediator between worlds, or even an object of worship. Modern attempts to re-examine the DNA have encountered resistance from traditional communities and some in the scientific community who believe the data was distorted or not published in full. It also remains unclear whether radiation levels inside the mound were measured or whether metal content in the skin and tissue was analyzed. This data has never been publicly published. In 2014, several local activists attempted to independently return the remains. The attempt was stopped by police, but it once again demonstrated that the question of who this woman was is simultaneously scientific, religious, and political. The Ukok Plateau has since been declared a protected area. Entry is restricted. Further excavations are prohibited. Dead map of the starry sky. In 1889, near the ancient city of Nippur, in what is now Iraq, an archaeological expedition from the University of Pennsylvania discovered an artifact that, at first glance, looked no different from thousands of other clay tablets from the Sumerian era. It was broken, covered in cuneiform writing, and apparently contained administrative data. But decades later, when methods for deciphering and comparing cuneiform became more precise, it turned out that this was not an accounting entry or a religious text, but an astronomical diagram dating back to no later than the 20th century BC. The tablet depicted circles, sectors, dots, and curves, representing the positions of stars and planets. Particularly prominent was the central circle, the Sun and the orbital lines, on which were designated not only the planets known from antiquity, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, but also two bodies that had not been mentioned anywhere before. One, clearly designated as an object outside the orbit of Saturn, the second, inside the orbit of the Earth, but not coinciding with either Venus or Mercury. This gave rise to one of the most controversial questions. Did the Sumerians know about planets not visible to the naked eye? Further research conducted in the 20th century revealed that the tablet's text mentions a certain point, the Abzu passing through the path of Anun on the day when the seven rise in the east. These formulations can be interpreted as describing the rising of seven bright celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets accessible to observation. But what is an Abzu? In Sumerian mythology, it is the underground or underwater kingdom, primordial water, the source of life. However, in the context of the tablet, it is located not underground, but in the sky, including next to the black point that does not shine. Some researchers suggested that this could be a description of the moon at new moon. However, the phrase pulsates but does not reflect doesn't fit this theory. Another hypothesis was then proposed. Perhaps it was an object crossing the plane of the ecliptic yas, meaning a comet, meteor, or even an exoplanet. The problem is that no such object had been observed at that time. Of particular interest was the fact that one of the diagrams on the tablet almost exactly matches the planetary arrangement on March 15, 2023, based on NASA orbital data. This has given rise to theories of a great cycle that repeats every 3,600 years, a number associated with the mythical body Nibiru in later Babylonian sources. Although many academic experts have dismissed such parallels as speculative piece, the fact remains. The Sumerians' level of astronomical knowledge was far greater than is commonly believed. Their lunar calendar, descriptions of eclipses, calculations of the lunar phases, and even forecasts of solar cycles. All of this has been documented and confirmed. But the celestial map from Nippur is different. It contains not only astronomical, but also conceptual elements inaccessible to direct observation. One sector, marked as the Gate of Fate, is oriented toward a point in the sky that coincides with the modern coordinates of the galactic center. This cannot be a coincidence. The galactic center cannot be seen without a radio telescope. How could the ancients have known that the center of our solar system was in the constellation Sagittarius? Why was it precisely there that the Anunnaki facing during the 7th turn of time? Why did they single out this particular direction from the entire sky? Some researchers point out that the Sumerians did not perceive the stars as fixed points, but as living entities possessing intention and breath. Perhaps the map was not an astronomical aid, but a model of the cosmos embedded in a mythical structure where stars, cycles, and bodies are parts of a single living mechanism. The tablet with the celestial diagram is currently housed in the Istanbul Archaeology Museum. It is not on display. Its number is listed in the archive as Unconfirmed Star Diagram. Reprints are limited, copies are incomplete. It remains an artifact around which data, controversy, and silence accumulate. Mycenaean Linear B inscriptions. In 1900, Sir Arthur Evans began excavating ruins on the island of Crete, which turned out to be the remains of a civilization long forgotten in European memory. He named it Minoan, after the legendary king Minos. Inside the palaces, archaeologists discovered hundreds of clay tablets covered in a strange system of symbols. They resembled writing, but did not belong to the Greek, Phoenician, or Egyptian alphabet. These signs were called linear script. Later, it was divided into 2 types, linear A and linear B. The latter was deciphered. The former was not. But it was the decipherment of linear B that left more questions than answers. Linear B was deciphered in 1952 by Michael Ventris, an architect and self-taught linguist. He demonstrated that the script concealed an archaic form of Greek. This meant that the Greeks, or ancestors of the Greeks, already existed in the 15th century BC, long before classical Hellas. But even after decipherment, the structure of Linear B does not fit the typical evolution of writing. The script uses a syllabic structure that is not typical of ancient Greek phonetics. It contains dozens of syllables that cannot be reproduced in Greek Yao, as if the signs were borrowed or adapted from another Bas, more ancient language. This has led researchers to hypothesize that Linear B was not invented, but inherited. The question is, from whom? The most obvious candidate is Linear A, the Minoan script found on Crete. But it has remained undecipherable for over 120 years. All we know is that the Linear A alphabet is superficially similar to B, but the language behind it is not Indo-European, not Semitic, and does not belong to any known language family. It is alien in structure, word forms, and word order. It is either a lost, isolated linguistic branch or a system constructed not according to the rules of linguistics, but based on a different principle of information encoding. One of the strangest aspects is the subject matter of the tablets. Most of them are inventories, accounts, and records of deliveries of grain, oil, and livestock. But some contain unusual words that are not repeated anywhere else. They are denoted by special symbols enclosed in frames, as if they are not dealing with objects, but with concepts or names that were given sacred significance. Among these words is the so-called Pa-ki-ja-na, which Ventris presumably translated as Spakiana, place. However, other researchers believe this is not a toponym, but a name or title, and next to this word is a symbol resembling a rayed solar disk, not typical of Greek mythology, but frequently found in Assyrian and Sumerian texts. This gave rise to the hypothesis of cultural and possibly technological borrowing between civilizations separated geographically and chronologically. How could the Mycenaeans have known about the symbolism characteristic of Mesopotamia? How did a writing system that arose in a closed island space become so complex and structural? Some epigraphers have suggested an external influence, perhaps from a civilization that existed before known cultures, one that may have left traces of Linear AE, Linear BE, and other symbolic systems throughout the Mediterranean. This would explain the similarity of some signs to ancient Indian symbols of the Harappan culture, as well as to early Chinese trigrams found in Shang-era excavations. The lack of contextual texts raises further questions. All Linear B writing consists of short notes, without narratives, without myths, without descriptions of events. It seems as if writing was used exclusively for internal administrative record-keeping, or, more likely, as just one system for recording information, the bulk of which existed orally, symbolically, or in another form entirely. B texts are stored in archives in Greece, Great Britain, and Italy. Digital copies are available, but not all tablets are represented in open databases. Some, discovered after the 1990s, have not been officially published and are known only from fragmentary mentions in classified academic reports. Mercury Fountain under the pyramid. In the very center of the ancient city of Teotihuacan, beneath the base of the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent, a tunnel hidden underground for over 1,800 years was discovered. Its discovery in 2003 was one of the most significant archaeological finds in Mesoamerica. But the real shock came to researchers in 2015 when, at the end of the tunnel, at a depth of more than 15 meters, a strange material was discovered. Pools of liquid mercury, carefully placed in niches, channels, and on the floors of secret chambers. This isn't just a rarity. It's a phenomenon technologically impossible for that era. In ancient times, mercury was considered a sacred substance. It symbolized changeability, transformation, the boundary between life and death. In alchemy, it was a substance through which matter could be transformed. In China, it was associated with immortality, and in Persia, with messengers from other worlds. But mercury was practically unknown in America, especially in its pure form and in such quantities. The team of archaeologist Sergio Gomez carried out a chemical analysis. It was not ore, not cinnabar, but liquid metallic mercury, preserved in a closed space for 1,500 years. It was housed in thin channels running across the floor, as if part of a complex circuit. There were no signs of evaporation, poisoning, or destruction of adjacent surfaces. This indicated that the room was sealed and built to contain the mercury. Along with the mercury, hundreds of small mica-coated clay balls, obsidian fragments, rare minerals, bird bones, and animal remains were found in the tunnel. None of this fit the classic model of a sacrificial ritual. Rather, it resembled a technological space, or at least a structure with a function we still don't understand. Some researchers have hypothesized that mercury could have been used for optical or auditory effects. In a confined space, a liquid metal mirror could reflect light to create the illusion of infinite depth or movement. Combined with spherical chambers and resonant walls, this could have served to induce trance states or as part of temple architecture aimed at influencing the psyche. Another hypothesis is electromagnetic. Mercury can conduct electricity under certain conditions. If the entire complex is considered part of an energy-intensive circuit, it may have been a resonant chamber or a system operating in conjunction with other city structures. As a reminder, the Street of the Dead in Teotihuacan is aligned with the planet's magnetic axis. Archaeologists also noted that the channel where the mercury was stored leads to a central underground chamber, not yet opened. Its location and shape correspond to descriptions of the mythical underworld of Tlalocan, mentioned in Mesoamerican cosmology as the place where the force of renewal, the source of life and death, resides. This particular chamber has been the subject of a silent controversy since 2017. Its opening has been postponed. Access to the excavation area is closed. The official reason is a technical difficulty. Unofficially, leaks from the archaeological team stated that the gas levels recorded in the chamber cannot be explained by natural sources, and that the equipment malfunctioned during the first descent. Furthermore, anomalies were recorded in electrical equipment. During an attempt to film, all equipment shut down simultaneously as it approached the center. Rumors spread quickly. Some claim that beneath the pyramid there may be not a burial, but an archive created by an unknown pre-Columbian culture with knowledge of minerals, geometry, acoustics, and possibly energy systems. Others see mercury as a symbol or even a trace of contact with extraterrestrial or non-anthropomorphic intelligence. This mercury fountain, hidden deep under the base of one of the most mysterious pyramids on the planet, looks too unnatural. For now, the chamber remains sealed. No official institution has announced a time frame for resuming excavations. Not a single photograph of the mercury channel has been published in full. Only fragments. Access to researchers from other countries is prohibited. All further information is classified as technical suspension. But the fact remains, mercury couldn't have appeared there by accident. It wasn't mined, processed, or stored in that form in other American cultures. And if it's there, it means someone knew how to handle it, and what it was needed for. About Malden Island. In the Pacific Ocean, in the southernmost part of the Line Island chain, 1,000 kilometers from the nearest settlement, lost among the turquoise waters, lies Malden Island, a piece of land only 8 kilometers long, which still baffles historians, archaeologists, and researchers of ancient cultures. It is uninhabited. There are no sources of fresh water, no fertile soil, no flora suitable for long-term habitation. But it was here that the ruins of stone buildings were found, the origin of which remains unexplained. The first documented mention of Malden was by Captain Lieutenant Byron, nephew of the poet George Byron, who landed on the island in 1825. He was shocked. Massive stone platforms, altar slabs, and basalt foundations, clearly man-made, stood on the deserted island. More than 40 large structures were scattered across the island without any trace of modern presence, burials, or cultural artifacts. Byron noted in his report, The island looks as if it had been abandoned thousands of years ago, and everything had stopped overnight. The platforms bear no inscriptions or symbols. However, the architecture of some structures is identical in style to Maris. Ritual sites on the islands of Tonga, Samoa, and especially the Marquesas Islands, located at a great distance from Malden. This has led to the assumption that these may have been Polynesian ritual complexes. But this raises the main question: how and why did people arrive on the island without water or food? Hydrologists have proven that Malden never had stable sources of fresh water. Even today, with modern technology, life on the island is extremely difficult. Therefore, long-term habitation was out of the question. Consequently, the structures were not built for habitation, but solely for ritual or some other, as yet unexplained purpose. The strangest of the objects is a square platform located in the southern part of the island, perfectly oriented to the cardinal points. At the corners are traces of basalt incisions, as if vertical columns had been inserted there. In the center is a round, carved mark in the stone, burned and coated with a layer of glassy alloy. Its origin and formation temperature have not yet been determined. However, one hypothesis is a lightning strike or the impact of a high-energy process. In 1962, Britain conducted nuclear tests on the island. The structures were carefully fenced off. The British Army archives have not yet been fully declassified. However, it is known that some scientists protested the choice of Malden for the tests, citing the presence of architectural objects of unknown nature. Their protest was rejected. After completing the tests, the military left the island, but took with them several stone blocks, which, as it later became known, were sent to London. None of them were ever returned or presented in museum collections. Their traces are lost in the documents of the Ministry of Defense. Modern satellite images show that structures on the island remain intact despite the nuclear explosions. Moreover, the sites on the southern part of the island are clean, devoid of vegetation, as if regularly cleared. Who does this and how is unknown. There's a theory that the island wasn't inhabited, but rather a signal point, a point in a network spanning Polynesia and oriented towards stellar positions. This assumption is supported by the fact that from the southern platform, on the day of the solstice, the astronomical horizon is visible, precisely coinciding with the rising of Sirius. But if this is true, then why were the structures built on an uninhabited, life-threatening patch of land? Some believe Malden is the remnant of a larger archipelago that sank underwater. The structures may be the pinnacles of a complex, much of which lies underwater. However, no underwater exploration has been conducted. The region remains unexplored, even to a degree. Malden remains a blank spot on the map. The 1991 archaeological report contains only 14 pages. Expeditions are no longer organized. Access to the island requires a permit, and most applications are rejected without explanation. Perfect spherical stones of Costa Rica. Hundreds of stone balls are scattered throughout the tropical forests of southern Costa Rica in the Decas Delta region. Some are the size of a fist, while others reach almost 3 meters in diameter and weigh over 15 tons. These objects are remarkably symmetrical. In-depth geometric analysis has shown that the accuracy of sphericity for some specimens is less than 0.2%. And yet, they were created in prehistoric times, long before the advent of metal tools and precision measuring instruments. Who, how, and why made more than 300 perfectly chiseled balls from hard volcanic rock, diorite and granodiorite, has remained an unresolved question for almost 100 years. The stones were first documented in the 1930s when the United Fruit Company began clearing jungle for banana plantations. Workers encountered massive stones, often arranged in groups, in straight lines, triangles, or circles. Some spheres were buried 80% underground. They were first blasted or cut open. Inside, nothing. Empty. No gold. No messages. No artifacts. But when the number of discovered balls exceeded 100, archaeologists began to wonder. Perhaps these objects have not a utilitarian, but a symbolic or even engineering function. One of the main mysteries remains the processing technology. Diorite is one of the hardest rocks, second only to diamond. It cannot be carved with stone tools without signs of rough work. But the Costa Rican spheres show no signs of impact, cracks, or cutting. The surface is smooth, as if polished by rotation. The idea that the spheres were formed naturally, for example, by erosion or weathering, was quickly dismissed. No known geological process produces such perfect shapes. Some of the spheres were found in places where there was no stone of the corresponding type within hundreds of kilometers. This means that the stones were not only carved, but also transported across rugged terrain, without wheels, animals, or roads. Who had the resources and motivation for such labor? One explanation is cultural. Supposedly, the balls were created as status symbols, symbols of power. The problem is that no burial or temple is directly associated with these balls. They do not accompany dwellings, nor are they located in sacred areas. They stand in fields, in jungles, sometimes in a strict geometric pattern. Some groups are arranged along lines that coincide with the directions of sunrise and sunset on the solstices. This may indicate an astronomical function, but the accuracy of such constructions is questionable, especially considering that some of the spheres were later displaced during agricultural work and when they were moved to museums. There were also more daring hypotheses. In the 1970s, Costa Rican engineer Jorge Calvo put forward the theory that the balls served as seismic shock absorbers, a way to dampen underground waves. In some regions where the spheres were located in groups, less destructive earthquakes were indeed recorded. However, there is no reliable data to support this idea. Another theory involves acoustics. When struck, some spheres produce a characteristic deep ringing sound, similar to a bell's resonance. Researchers have attempted to record the resonant frequencies and correlate them with geographic nodes. There are some coincidences, but no scientific consensus has been reached. Today, the balls are listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. However, most of them are scattered among museums, private gardens, and abandoned plantations. Many objects were destroyed in the 20th century due to superstition and gold prospecting. The bearers of the culture that created the balls disappeared long before the arrival of the Spanish. The language, mythology, and names were lost. No modern ethnic group in Costa Rica considers them to be their ancestors. This makes the spheres an isolated technological and cultural phenomenon, without history, without a name, and without explanation. All we have are perfect geometric bodies scattered across the earth, without function, without text, without context. Ruins of Nan Madol. In the Pacific Ocean, off the east coast of the island of Pohnpei, lies one of the strangest and least known archaeological wonders on the planet, Nan Madol. It is a complex of ruins spread across more than 90 artificial islands connected by canals, right in the ocean. The structures are made of enormous basalt columns, some weighing up to 50 tons, and are stacked without mortar to form walls, platforms, and temples up to 8 meters high. All this takes place in a region where, before the arrival of Europeans, there were no metal tools, no writing, and no animals capable of carrying heavy loads. Nan Madol is often called the Venice of the Pacific, but this definition is misleading. Unlike Venice, the city was not a residential center or a trading hub. It was an isolated ritual complex located far from the main island, on open water, where storms and tides make life virtually impossible. Building such structures, coastal, massive, and watertight, requires colossal effort. But no one knows why they were built here. According to local lore, the complex was erected by forces from the heavens. Legends claim that two brothers, Olushipa and Olushopa, arrived on the island and, using magic or flying stones, erected towers of black stone. Locals avoided settling in Nan Madol, considering it a city of the dead and a territory where other laws governed the world. Archaeological evidence confirms that construction began no later than the 8th century AD, but traces of habitation here are considerably older. Some fragments of the cultural layer extend back 1,500 years. But where do the basalt columns come from? The only place on Pohnpei where a similar stone exists is the Soki's volcano, located on the opposite side of the island. It's over 30 kilometers of rugged jungle terrain, followed by a sea route. How and why did ancient people move hundreds of thousands of tons of stone across the island and the ocean without wheels, winches, or boats capable of supporting such weight? Some believe the columns were hewn on site, others that they were part of an ancient lava formation cut by hand. But the question of transportation remains open. In the 1907 archives, a German officer wrote that the locals refused to even discuss the construction mechanism. They claimed the stones flew by themselves. Studies of the underwater portion of the complex have revealed massive platforms submerged in 2 to 3 meters of water, which may indicate that part of the city was built during a time when sea levels were lower. This adds another mystery. The structures may be much older than is commonly believed. Some hypotheses consider Nan Madol a geomagnetic point similar to Stonehenge, Tiwanaku, or the Great Pyramid of Giza. The complex is built with a clear orientation, and one of the main streets points to the rising point of Sirius around 1000 BC. Coincidence or something more? It also remains unclear why a ritual center was built on water, in a place prone to floods, typhoons, and erosion. Perhaps the water itself served as a sacred boundary. Or, according to another theory, the city was used not for habitation, but for control, perhaps over the entrance to an underground system. Studies of the seabed reveal the presence of tunnel-like structures, but access to them is extremely limited. Today, Nan Madol is officially recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But expeditions are rare, funding is minimal, and global scientific interest is limited. All that remains are shattered ruins, canals overgrown with seaweed, and stone walls, each weighing more than the tribe's entire boat could support. No inscriptions, no skeletons, no weapons, only stone, water, and silence. 20 mysteries, 20 objects whose existence has been confirmed by archaeologists, but whose meaning remains unknown. Pyramids under the ice, mercury fountains, cities on the water, stones speaking a language we can't yet read. All of these are not myths or legends, but real facts that science has yet to unlock. Perhaps the answers are hidden beneath layers of time. Perhaps we're simply not ready to hear them yet. But each of these traces of the past makes us wonder how small our memory is and how vast the history we've forgotten.